Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host and the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome to the show, Rafe.
Thanks very much, Jim. Nice to be here.
Glad to hear you're in good health, as good as it gets for you.
Well, that's right. When you get to my advanced years, the fact that you woke up in the morning is good health.
You were upset that Premier Christy Clark played politics at Bill Bennett's funeral.
Yes.
What was the deal there?
Well, it just seemed to me to be so inappropriate. And she was making it sound as if BC Hydro wasn't only her idea and Gordon Campbell's idea, at least as they cite C, wasn't only their idea, that it was actually Bill Bennett's. Well, problem with that is Site C came along in W.A.C. Bennett's time, and it was there for every premier thereafter to sort of sniff at. But it really was a BC Hydro pipe dream, and nobody really went for it. Bennett talked about it, Bill Bennett talked about it at one time offhand when he couldn't do anything about it, but it was never a part of his policy, nor any of the premiers after that. And as a matter of fact, the president of BC Hydro, as late as I think 1990, 3 or 4 or 5, something like that, said it would never go ahead. So it was just a bad idea. So along comes Gordon Campbell, and he has this idea of the IPPs, independent power producers, and he also has the idea of Site C. And so he takes away from BC Hydro the right to make power, gives it all to private companies who make enormous profits on this, have bankrupted BC Hydro, and at the same time, BC Hydro is going to have to do Site C. Now, this was Campbell's idea. Nobody else's. Immediately seconded by Christy Clark. So the two of them are the ones that got Site C going. Half a dozen premiers before that said, no thanks. Now, to start in somebody's memorial service, to make it appear as if he was the one responsible in this highly contentious issue. I mean, if it wasn't a contentious issue, you could understand. But here's an issue, probably the most contentious issue in British Columbia right now. All of a sudden, she's connecting herself to the dead premier. And I just thought that was in enormous bad taste. I really did. I just couldn't understand why any premier would do that.
The Vancouver housing market, of course, has always been more expensive than anywhere else in Canada. And if now there's a lot of attention paid to it, but do you really think governments can do much about market forces like that?
Well, if the government had any investigating to do, it was 2 or 3 years ago. Along comes Christie now, when the situation has perhaps got out of control, with an idea of having it investigated. I think you're both right and wrong, Jim. Yes, prices have always been high in Vancouver for the obvious reason we live in the best part of Canada. People want to come here, etc. But I think there's also been an artificial element come into it too, with money being poured in from China. Now, the question is that illegal? Is there something wrong with that? Or is that just capitalism at work? What are you going to do? Repeal capitalism and say, no, we only want lots of money when we really need it, that it's going to do us some good. But if you can come along and make a profit on the money, we don't want it at all. And I think what is kind of interesting here, as you'll remember, as I do, back in the 80s, when we were begging China to give us money, the interest rates were 25%, and people couldn't buy houses, and we were just begging them to come in. Of course, now it's quite different. I honestly don't know. This whole thing, Jim, it doesn't pass the smell test. There's something bad going on. But I think it's kind of interesting that Christie would spring into this with a year to go before the election, and not in the time when she might have been able to do something to alleviate the prices.
Right, the damage has been done.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think it's sort of a little like King Canute trying to stop the tide.
Well, even if a commission says, yes, it's overpriced or whatever, what can a government really do?
Well, I think that's the next good question. I'm not quite sure what the hell they can do. First of all, I don't know what jurisdiction they would have to stop money coming into the country. you'd have a problem, I think, with the federal government on that. And also you might have a problem with, well, I suppose the new trade agreement, if that goes through. All these things come into it. I honestly don't know what you can do in these days. You know, take yourself back to 15, 20, 30 years ago, and money could be controlled by government because they went to the bank and said, don't let them take it out of the country. Well, now you take it out of the country with the pressing a button and whizzle, it's gone. And I'm honestly not sure what that they can do about it. But I get back to my main point. If you were going to find out, the time to do that was when the problem was getting started, just rolling along, not when it's the condition is now, where so many commitments have been made, so much money has come in. I think it probably is going to be too late. However, Christie wants to look good going into the election next May, saying, "Look at me, I'm trying to help out my poor fellow British Columbians, and young people should be able to get homes, you know, all the crap that she'll come out with, as if she was leading the fight where the fight should have been led 2 or 3 years ago."
And when it comes to the government, is there anything major she should be doing right now to fix things in BC?
Resign. No, I know that sounds kind of supercilious, but it just gets worse. You've got to show leadership in times like this. I think everybody knows that, Jim. So what are we doing for leadership? We're going back to Ottawa to try to get Mr. Trudeau to give her some money to build some LNG plants so she can help China get rid of 500 coal mines. I mean, I've never heard anything quite like this in my life. I mean, China hasn't said, yes, we'll take it, we want to get rid of those coal mines. It's just, she's hung on this LNG, she's stuck with it politically, and she doesn't know anything else to do. And, it's really sad. She's, you know, sort of like the carpenter that only owns a hammer. Everything looks like a nail, and everything looks like LNG no matter where she goes. And, you know, you've asked a decent question that I don't know that I can answer. Here we are, committed to Site C, an enormous undertaking. BC Hydro has gone from, I think it's less than $1 billion to over $9 billion in debt since the Liberals took over. That money is a debt of yours and mine every bit as much as anything else is. It won't show in the budget, of course. They've got that so they don't have to do that. But the fact of the matter is, you couldn't get away with that, and I couldn't get away with it. Only governments can, and they have lost huge amounts of money. The actual debt of the province of British Columbia has just soared. In the meantime, she's running around trying to set up LNG plants. Now, I'm not quite sure what you do under those circumstances, but what you don't do is flog a bunch of dead horses. And Site C is just going to bankrupt us even worse. BC Hydro as well. LNG is not going to go in the foreseeable future. Get off it, madam. Find something to do that's going to help, not something that's just going to make things worse.
Well, what's the business plan to support Site C? Because BC's power consumption has been falling every year the last 10 years.
Well, this is something I think the public has got to understand. Ever since the beginning of time, certainly as far back as I can remember, and that's about the same, BC Hydro has always substantially overestimated its power needs. It's done that to be on the safe side, so the government can never go to them and say, "Oh my God, you left us short of power." So it always and it goes dramatically high. This goes way back, and it certainly was around in my time. BC Hydro has continued to do that, but what they have not done, Jim, and this is an important point, they have not gone to alternate energy sources. Instead of looking at those and checking out thermal power and tidal power and wind power and all the rest of it, now that it's technically easy to get that into the grid, they continue down the road of BC Hydro, or Hydro, and of Site C. And this is where the leadership comes in. Christy Clark has not done anything to stop that. Now, it's hard to say what somebody else would do, but I've only known one premier up close in my life, and that was Bill Bennett. And I know what he would have done from what my experience with him. Long ago, he would have said, "Look, stop this hydro all the time. We've got other things to do. We can't go on putting a hydro. We don't need a lot of power, so get yourselves ready for an alternate source. If we do need it, it'll be easy to get and relatively inexpensive." But that's not what she's done. And I guess the point I'm making, Jim, is there's just not been leadership here. There's been the very reverse of it. And I know I get worked up on this, but when I see Christie and I call him a gumshoe going around the country talking to these high and mighty people in Malaysia and Indonesia that are out and out crooks and on the 1 foot in jail, where I see them going around doing that, selling LNG, etc., which isn't going to be sold. And I see what's happening in with Site C and the needs of British Columbia for the future. It worries the hell out of me. And it's just, you can't expect a premier and a government to always win, but you can expect them to show leadership, show them that they're trying to do other things than just beat a dead horse. And that's all we've seen from Christie is LNG and Site C, and those are two very dead horses.
Well, hydro dams are not the green projects people used to think they were. All the rotting vegetation trapped in them gives off horrible amounts of CO2. Plus, the Peace River Valley is very fertile soil, something that the planet is running out of. People don't know that we lose about 1% of our topsoil a year worldwide, and so there's been a 30% decline in topsoil over the last 30 years. That is soil that we need.
Well, this, I think, is a very troubling feature. It's been said before, and you just said it, I guess, now. They're not making any more land. We're running short of it gradually. It's something we have to protect and preserve. The Peace River area has always been a great agricultural area. And what are we going to do? We're going to bugger that up for something we don't need. More power. And it just does not make any sense. And I guess this is what's troubling me also, Jim. The truth is not being told. We've been continually told by Christie and Gumshoe that, for example, that the LNG is going to save us, and we're going to have X number of plants and billions of dollars here and all that. We now know that's not true, but she continues to tell the same fibs. She goes around telling everybody that Site C is necessary. We have to have more electricity. That's just rubbish, and everybody knows it. And furthermore, she hasn't even got customers for it. So, we don't know where the hell that electricity is going to go. All we know is they're saying $9 billion. My bet would be it'll run over $10 billion when it's through. We're going to spend that to ruin a huge agricultural area and for all time and make power that we don't bloody well need. And I just can't understand why the people are putting up with this.
Plus, household demand for power is going to go down as it becomes easier to generate solar and store it in efficient batteries that Tesla plans to make.
Oh, absolutely. This is what I'm saying. The technology's raced way ahead of hydro. I mean, hydro is 50s and 60s technology. Anybody could build a dam and ruin the surroundings and that sort of stuff and make electricity, but it's highly expensive to make, and it is ruinous to the environment. And there are so many other ways. The problem before was the other energy, wind and so on, is intermittent. It doesn't, it doesn't come at all the time like hydro does. So it was hard to fit it into the grid. But you just pointed out with solar and other sources, it's now being done. Other countries are doing this. Other countries that have to do it, necessity being the mother of invention, that have to do it, are in fact doing it. We're not. We're committing British Columbia for the next God knows how long to electrical power and ruining the environment and ruining our agricultural land at the same time. Now, please tell me how that makes any sense.
Well, tidal power as well. Right underneath Lionsgate Bridge, you have that great tidal run. It's almost like rapids twice a day. And the efficiency of it's called blue energy. It's very slow moving turbines. It doesn't disturb the marine life. And yet you would be generating loads of power. Plus, because of Vancouver Island, the coast of BC has variable tidal times. So you could go to different tidal basins and more or less have a continuous generation of power along the coast despite what time it is.
Well, the problem, and you're right, the problem is that BC Hydro has not been thinking about this. They have not been dealing with alternative sources of energy and coming back to the government saying, here's this, and this is what we should be looking at. As I say, why do you overuse this example? But again, they're kind of like the carpenter that's only got a hammer. All they see is a nail, and that's a hydroelectric power, and they can't see anything else. And, even to the name of the company, BC Hydro. If you change that to BC Energy and change the mandate and you've got to change the culture of the place, the thinking of the place, because it is all just hydro now and has been back to W.A.C. Bennett's days. And that's got to change. We're in an entirely different time, different challenges. And here, as I say, we're going to make hugely expensive electricity, expensive in every way, and we haven't even got customers for it. We certainly don't need it ourselves.
Rafe, the Montreal area mayors have come out against a pipeline going from Alberta to the eastern coast. What do you think about it?
Well, Jim, I was laughing to somebody today when I was having lunch today with a fellow down at the store, and I said, it really is kind of funny. All the fuss that's going on about the Eastern Pipeline now, I can remember writing in the Common Sense Canadian about 4 or 5 years ago saying, nobody in Eastern Canada or Ottawa or Toronto cares about the pipelines that we're all bitching about and doing all kinds of problems with. But I said, the moment they start putting that Eastern one in, you wait. All of a sudden it'll become a national issue and we should all be worried about it and all be, setting our hair on fire, which of course is what's happening. Let me put it this way, Jim. I think there are two issues here. First of all, does a province, never mind Montreal, but does British Columbia have the right to say, look, we are not going to ruin our environment for fossil fuels, and we're not going to do that for a lot of reasons. One of them happens to be the Paris Agreements. The second thing I think which is so important are those Paris Agreements. How do you make those deals, which the Prime Minister has made, our Premier has made, every Premier in Canada has gone along with it, singing our praises, patting ourselves on the back, because we're going to commit ourselves to looking after the whole climate change problem, and then come back. It would hardly land in the airport and come back and start planning more and more pipelines, more and more stuff out of the tar sands, faster and faster to countries that can't wait to put it up in the atmosphere. It's a whole thing. You cannot square that circle, and it just makes absolutely no sense. Either we commit ourselves to weaning off fossil fuels, and that will be hard, it'll hurt a lot of people, it's got to be done in the best way possible. Either we do that, or we say, to hell with it. There's nothing to worry about with climate change, and anyway, it's going to be our grandkids that choke anyway, so why should we worry about it? We can't have it both ways. We can't wean ourselves off fossil fuels while pumping it out the pipelines into tankers and over to China as fast as you can. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, you'll remember Harper's finance minister, Joe Oliver, saying, why worry about the financial problems? Our grandkids will have to pay for it.
Well, this is exactly it. It is the Joe Oliver theory. I'm all right, Jack. Don't worry about me. And my great-grandkids, I'm not going to be around to see that. And probably they'll come up with some kind of answer. They'll probably be smart enough to figure something out. Well, that's a pretty sad approach, but it's the one that we're taking. And as I say, I've been asking everybody that I know, particularly the ones that are perhaps more towards Christy Clark's philosophy of life than I am, and say, would you please square this circle for me? We are promised to cut down on fossil fuels dramatically and protect the atmosphere and climate, and at the same time, we're increasing our production, opening up and whizzing away with the tar sands again when it's the world's biggest polluter, and pouring it all out through pipelines. They're going to put it in tankers and send it to people that aren't going to store it. They're going to send it up into the atmosphere as fast as they can. Now, here's something I think that people ought to remember, Jim. There's been this statement around, and Christie's father of making it, well, LNG is benign. It's nowhere near as bad as the other fossil fuels, coal and oil. That is just rubbish. The scientific thinking on that has changed to 100%, a complete turnaround. LNG, if you assess it from the time you take it out of the ground to when you put it in the atmosphere, is the worst of the three. So we haven't even got that going. Back in the days when LNG was thought to be the most benign, well, I suppose there was an argument. But that argument can't be made now, and if you make it, you're not telling the truth.
Rafe, what about Christy Clark's continued support for trophy wolf and grizzly hunting?
Well, I think that's appalling. I really do. haven't we advanced at all? You know, it's strange, Jim. I was asked, not all that long ago, and I don't mean to sound boastful here because I'm too old for that. But I was asked a while ago, you're a smarty pants mayor with all your great environmental ideas. You were environment minister back in 1971. What the hell did you do? Well, one of the things I did, Jim, was stop the killing of wolves in the north. I mean, this is 1979. That's 36 years ago. And now we're still back doing exactly the same thing. And the notion that somehow we've got to cull these animals, or else the other animals will be killed or their prey. There's a cycle that takes place in nature. Yes, indeed. Caribou get knocked down and deer get knocked down as wolves increase. When that happens, there aren't enough deer and other ungulates for the wolves to eat, and so they starve and they die out. It goes in a circular way. It's cruel, but that's Mother Nature. Now to come along and kill them artificially, you put man in there. He's in the cycle, and he's not killing in order to make the natural cycle work. He's killing for the hell of it. And I think this is just absolutely appalling. And it strikes me again as being very, very hypocritical for the premier to stand and take the credit for the great rainforest, the setup that they have there now with logging companies and so on. Take credit for that, and at the same time allow grizzly bears and so on to be killed. Interestingly, you can't go into a bear cave and shoot them, but you can stand outside the door and shoot them as they come out. And the whole thing, it's back, once again, it's 40 years old, Jim. I mean, yes, there are people that hunt for food, and particularly Aboriginals and so on. I'm not talking about them. But surely we're past the time when people take out big guns just to kill grizzly bears, not to eat them, but to put a head up on a wall. I mean, haven't we advanced beyond that?
Yes. Well, I mean, I grew up north where if one family got a moose, that was food for the entire community for the winter.
Well, that makes some sense, and I can understand that. I know some of my friends, however, that say they go out to get deer for food, and so they're sort of like the Aboriginals, but they're all wealthy people. They don't need to go out and get them. They're just saying that to justify it. What they really want to do is go out and shoot deer. And it just strikes me. Once again, I'm beyond shooting them. I'm beyond fishing now, whatever it may be. So I really don't care personally. But it just strikes me that we're not advancing very far in our attitudes, and it goes right back to we're talking about the Paris Agreement and fossil fuels and so on, where we've now learned to talk a great game, but we don't do it. We don't follow up on what we're saying. It's the same thing with grizzly bears and so on, and mountain sheep. And, nobody eats them. They go out there so they can put the head up on a wall, and some of them pay enormous money. And I understand that the guide outfitters are upset about that. But as times change, Jim, people that are in businesses that have to change with them, they suffer. When cars came in, people that made saddles for horses suffer. I mean, I don't mean to be trite about it, but it's just the way that things evolve. Industrial Revolution, of course, had the Luddites breaking the machines because they wanted to do it all by physical labor as they always had. But it doesn't happen that way. It doesn't work that way. As you progress, there are people that fall by the wayside, people that prosper. You've got to look after the people that fall by the wayside, make sure they get other employment and help them out and so on. But you can't say, oh, no, we're going to continue to do things the old way, just because we want to do it that way and we prefer to do it that way. You either evolve and advance or you don't.
Well, they've done studies. Live wolves, live grizzlies, bring in about 10 times the money of the hunting of those animals.
Well, of course that's right. We're all doing, and you're right to make that point. We're now doing this at the very same time these animals alive are commanding a great deal of attention from tourists. And, if you could take the same argument and look at whales. We used to kill whales. In my lifetime, they had whaling stations up and down Vancouver Island, up and down the coast. They kill whales, etc. All of a sudden, it became obvious that first, the whales weren't all that great in terms of making money, but secondly, it was a lot better and a lot more profitable to have people come out and look at them. And this is exactly the same thing we have with other wildlife. People are now coming to see it. They're coming from all over the world to see it. And it strikes me sometimes as a little odd. In 1986, we had Expo to bring people to British Columbia so they could see the wonders of supernatural British Columbia. In the meantime, we want to unnaturalize it by killing the animals. And it's an attitudinal change we have to make. And I've got to admit, and I'm sure you would too, that 25 or 30 years ago, I thought differently. I mean, I didn't care all that much. I couldn't believe we'd ever run out of grizzly bears and that sort of thing. I mean, weren't the woods full of them? Well, we now find the answer to that is no. And they're not here forever. We have to marshal the resources and look after them. And if we don't change, then they're going to change, unfortunately, very much adversely.
Rafe, always great talking to you. Great issues, and they're not going to go away.
They are, Jim, and let's talk about it some more sometime.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions for the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
In Goddard we trust. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.